Everybody, just before we get started with the show here, I want to make a quick shout out to the good folks at Springs Homes for supporting Studio 809 and this podcast. They're in the business of real estate because they love helping clients achieve their goals. Competitive, collaborative, and trustworthy. Meet the real estate pros at springshomes.com.
This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, all these other podcasts we've done. I think this one's going to be 299 for crying out loud. 299 weeks. I need a week off someplace. My photography website, all that good stuff. There's also a contact link, so you can send me a message if you'd like. If you have a question, a comment, a suggestion, always looking for suggestions for guests to have on the program, or also sign up for my email list. It comes out for about once a week, very short, just a summary of of what I've done the last week, and maybe new news has popped up since all that stuff. All of that is at hikingbob.com. So do me a favor and check that out. Today, my guest is a friend and one of the smartest people I know in the outdoor recreation industry, Becky Leinweber, who is the executive director of the Pikes Outdoor Recreation Alliance. And Becky's been on the show before. Becky, thanks for being back.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you, Bob. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for taking your time. I know you like me, are in between trips. You're in and you're heading out, and I'm doing the same thing. So I appreciate you finding a little time for me to discuss some stuff here. As part of PPRA's function, mission is it's an alliance. So PPRA brings in the nonprofits, the for-profit, like your company, for example, that takes people out fishing and sells fishing gear, and those groups, and also the government agencies, the National Park Service, the Forest Service, the city parks, county parks, state parks, all those people. And what I love about being a member of PPRA is we all sit around the table and we get to represent to each other the different issues that we're facing. What are nonprofits facing? Money shortages. What are government agencies facing? Here's a surprise: money shortages. And
common theme.
Yeah, common theme. But and also what the commercial industries are facing. Demands for their services and how can they support everybody else. It's a great alliance and a great opportunity to everybody to sit down and be able to talk to each other and understand each other's issues. The common issue, and we've discussed this on this podcast, and you and I have discussed this in the past, is the surge in usage in our open spaces. Now, some of this is COVID, but let's face it, this was happening before COVID. I just think COVID took this 10-year timeline, and I'm just pulling numbers out, and compressed it into a 2-year timeline. And everybody who was planning 10 years down the road now has to plan a year or 6 months down the road.
Yeah, and you're not alone. I kind of use the same illustration. I don't put numbers to it, but COVID just catapulted us several years into the future as far as the challenges and the issues that we're dealing with. And we're playing catch up. we're really trying to do our best to play catch up.
I've talked on this podcast and even in my column where land managers are taking measures to try to reduce the impact, restricting how many campsites there are, making those reservation only. It's a pretty popular one. Timed entry permits. Now we're seeing a state park is considering doing that. I think in the next CPW commission meeting, they're going to approve that one for El Dorado Canyon. I've also said I don't like those systems, but I get it. I understand how we got there, but they take a lot of spontaneity out of things. Are we, by establishing these systems, and I'm asking you because I know you interact with a lot of agencies, so, speak as much as you know about what these agencies are doing. Is there a chance that we're ever going to get back to the way it was, quote unquote, where we could go camping whenever we wanted to in most of these places and we didn't have to buy or get a reservation ahead of time to go to Rocky Mountain National Park, for example? Are we ever going to get back to that position?
I wish I could look in my crystal ball, but I have a pretty good hunch in talking with our land managers and just those that are in the know. The only thing that would set us back to the way we used to do things is if the demand for outdoor recreation and enjoyment of our outdoor spaces shifted. And if it went way back to the way it was many years ago. And that's just not going to happen. In talking to our land managers, the increase that they're seeing in usage, they feel like, yeah, we might have a little dip post COVID, but the mixed bag, and it is a mixed bag because there's really great news about it, and there's also challenges that come with it, is that the secret's out, and people have found out how amazing it is to spend time in the outdoors, and all the benefits that come with that. And because of that, some of the management issues that have arisen, those are probably going to be with us, and a lot of new innovation has come out and will continue. I feel like more innovation will come out as far as how to manage all the recreators, how to disperse recreation, how to share information about areas that are less busy, more busy, etc. But some of the models that you mentioned, timed entry, reservation systems, designated dispersed instead of just dispersed camping, those things I think are here to stay. Now, that's not to say that people can't still have some of those amazing backcountry, me in the wilderness experiences. You absolutely can. And a lot of that has to do with information, planning and preparedness, and expectations. Just knowing what you need to do, and a commitment to have the kind of experience that you want to have. But we now have a large group of new recreational users that are figuring it out, that are kind of learning how to do things. And our experienced recreational users, they'll probably just, if they want to continue to have those experiences, they're just going to have to work harder at it. A lot of planning ahead because of the reservations, a lot of hiccups in those systems that they're figuring out and they're trying to work with. And we can talk about some of those, but in answer to your question overall, I don't see us ever going back to the way it was, but I do think there will always be experiences to be had that any type of recreational user can enjoy.
What would it take? Say that somebody said, we had a magic ball, and they said, here's what you would need to do. Here's the resources you would need to get it to go back to the way it used to be, whatever you want to define that at. For me, it would be many years ago. Some people, it would only be 5 years ago. What would it be? Would it be more land, more people? And I say not more land, we can't create land, but more available land, more people, more money. Is that what it would take? And is that a reasonable expectation? Can we buy more land? Can we hire more people? Where are we going to get more money? Is that what it would take?
Yeah.
And is it reasonable to expect that?
I'd almost say all of the above. And it really is. In a perfect world, it would be all of the above. And we can take those one at a time. But as far as the land issue, we joke about it, but it's such a true thing. And we talk about that with our outdoor ethics, that the land that we have is the land that we have. The places that we have, we're not going to grow new rocks and new dirt and new waterways. However, there are some things that we can do. There's one of the new things that we're starting to look at is, besides conservation easements, we're looking at which private landowners can serve their land, and they can allow specific uses on that land. There are also trail easements, which is a little bit newer, where it's not conserving all of the land, but it's an easement on a trail through private property that connects it. Usually it's to connect it to an outdoor area or another trail that's on the other side of that private land. So working with private landowners is definitely one of those things. But there's also, a lot of development happens when you have all kinds of growth that we're seeing. And a lot of cities and towns are looking at that development, and they're thinking about the future, and they're thinking about green space. So now we're not talking about the forest, but even in our cities and in our communities, how new development is made and a carve out for green space. and making sure that that's a part of that community, because recognizing that that community is going to want a park, they're going to want some trees, they're going to want some of that outdoor access locally and close to home. So that's one way. And then, yeah, looking at our open spaces and looking at, what land out there should be preserved. It has some specific features, some very special, iconic things that people love. So definitely we're not growing more land, but we're looking at the land that exists and looking at it a little bit differently. So that's that first thing that you talked about. And I don't know what order those were in, but one of the next things that you talked about was resources. And let's talk about the people resources, because when we think about, yes, if we could throw it back to the way it was, where we could just go up and camp, pretty much wherever we wanted and have that experience, and we pack it in, pack it out, but we aren't there shoulder to shoulder with the next guy, or we're not stuck on the highway waiting to turn in. Well, what are some things that would need to be done with people resources? Well, that is one of the big shortages that specifically our federal land managers are experiencing. This growth has happened. And again, like you said, it started before COVID. So, we can't blame COVID for all of this. But there have been some challenges within our federal agencies on people resources. And you can look at a graph and just see, how many park rangers or forest rangers existed, in 2008, 2009 versus today in a particular area, and you'll see a decrease. But at the same time, the use has gone up, the impacts have gone up. And so one of the things that has changed is legislation on fire borrowing, which I think will help our federal partners to a degree, specifically the Forest Service, because it used to be that fighting forest fires came out of their general budget, where other natural disasters, there was a different way to deal with that. Well, that shift has been made legislatively, so that will help. But it feels like we are in this perpetual state of not enough people. Not enough people resources for the increased need for security and enforcement. For us in the Pikes Peak region, I think they just added somebody, but it was 1.5 forest rangers for the whole Pikes Peak Ranger District that dealt with enforcement.
You're talking about law enforcement rangers, right?
It's just completely inadequate for what we have. And when you look at people resources, you have to look at the financial resources, because they go hand in hand, right? So a lot of communities are actually supplementing federal agencies by hiring their own enforcement personnel, rangers, etc., to supplement what those federal agencies have, because the towns and communities have recognized we just don't have what we need. We're actually looking at a model of doing that with a new group that's just getting started, Friends of Old Stage and Gold Camp Roads, because it's an area where there are private landowners, there are commercial outfitters, and there are just regular everyday recreators who are getting impacted by some illegal shooting, a lot of graffiti, a lot of trash dumping in that corridor. And so the citizens are coming together and saying, we need to do something about this. So I think you're going to start seeing more public-private partnerships to address some of these things, instead of saying it's a one-size-fits-all solution. But certainly those financial resources and the people resources for our land managers is going to be key to not really taking us back to the way we were, although that's what the conversation you and I started with here, but just being able to address the challenges that we have today. And they really they have a pretty heavy mantle of responsibility, where they want to safeguard the experiences that the public enjoys through these natural resources, but at the same time, they need to manage the natural resources and make sure that they're not getting negatively affected in such a way that the public isn't going to have those in the future. So it's not an easy challenge, certainly.
I think one of the things that I often remind people of is that the Forest Service, for example, is not a recreational entity. They've kind of got forced into it, but their job is to protect the forest, the watershed. The Pikes, the Pike National Forest is a water resource that was created to protect the watershed. So that's still their priority. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, because most of us want to go out there and enjoy it, they've gotten forced into managing recreation. But that was never really their job. It was just to protect the trees and protect the water and that kind of stuff. So you're dealing with agencies. Of course, over time they've adapted. Wouldn't like this happened yesterday, but they weren't invented for that purpose to begin with. And their goal is still, their primary goal is still resource protection, like you said. Now they do that by regulating or controlling recreation, obviously, but we're dealing with agencies that they're doing stuff they're not supposed. They were not intended to do.
Weren't intended originally. Yeah. And their goal. I mean, one of the things we like to say is our public lands. They're our lands. You know, all of those public lands are for the public, and so they have had to shift because the public demand is to enjoy those natural resources, and through outdoor recreation, as well as extracting the resources and using it for grazing cattle and all the other things that land is for.
You kind of mentioned this when you're talking about people, and it's a thing that comes up all the time. And you know, no matter what land manager talk to, is money. If we had more money, but what would more money do? It would pay for more people. That is good. But would it pay for more land? Is there more land out there to get? I mean, the federal government, for example, in Nevada is the largest landowner in the state of Nevada. The federal government is a significant landowner in Colorado, especially the western half of Colorado. Is there more land to get, or would more money just help open up some of those lands for more recreation?
Yeah, I don't think it's really about more land to get. The only way to do that, again, is through private land ownership and purchasing it through conservation easements, et cetera, or just purchasing it outright and having new open space, which Colorado Springs has actually done an outstanding job of, I think. But I think it is that the funding can be used for so many different things: infrastructure, transportation needs. And when I think of infrastructure, when you think about that in the outdoor space, it's not really the same as you think about it in other conversations. Infrastructure for us includes campgrounds. It includes trailheads, parking lots, maintenance of our infrastructure, bathrooms, the toilet paper to put in the bathrooms. You know, it's all of those things. Picnic areas. You know, it's interesting, and I was on a call this morning, and I shared with them in the United States, the number one outdoor activity is picnicking. So when you think of infrastructure, we don't always think about that, but having a place for people to just go, have a picnic, sit down by a stream, in the trees, et cetera, and enjoy it. So funding would go to a number of different things. One of the things that the Great American Outdoors Act, which was enacted in the last administration and continues and will continue going forward, which was a great piece of legislation, but a big part of that is to deal with deferred maintenance. It's not sexy, it's not cool, but everything we have out there needs to be maintained. So it's not really a matter of let's build all this new stuff, but we really need to take care of what we already have and make it usable. You know, we've got closed campgrounds, we've got shut down bathrooms, we've got shoulder seasons where you can't even use campgrounds and bathrooms and things, where here in Colorado, our weather is gorgeous year round for the most part. So that that maintenance, I think, is a big part of the funding nut. I think that's a big part of where it needs to go. So anyway, that was one thing that I think needs to be thought of, that it just doesn't go to people, but the people resources do the maintaining. So it really all does kind of go together. And no, there's no new lands necessarily for us to procure in that sense, for as far as the national forest growing, et cetera. But there's so much opportunity on what we already have. My husband and I drove through, you mentioned our trips, and you contacted me for this when I was out in Utah. I was out in the amazing areas out there, the Canyonlands. We went to Bryce Canyon. We went to Valley of the Gods. So many amazing areas, and it's really interesting. We have a lot of land. We really do have a lot of public land and public open spaces. But some of the challenge is access. So some of the problem is access. Some of the problem is that we still hotspot all these special places. And there's so much more, but people don't know about it. They don't know about some of those other areas. And one of the things I encourage people to do is get off the beaten path, the places everybody else knows about. Try to explore, find some new forest roads to go up, and you'll find a new view you didn't even know existed. But when we stay within the areas that everybody posts on social media, well, that's where we get the backlogs. That's where we're going to get the jammed parking areas. I'll share one experience with you. My husband and I, this was a couple of years ago. Well, it was pre-COVID, so now maybe 3+ years ago. But we wanted to go fly fishing, and we went to a particular area where it was very popular to go hike 14ers. So there were actually 2 14ers. Trailheads were very, very close together. But there was also a stream that ran at the base. And our goal was to check out the stream. It was a place we hadn't fished before. We didn't know if there were any trout in there. So in our pursuit of it, we came up there and we saw cars wedged between trees. The parking lot was overflowing. And this is before COVID. People were all over the road, parked on the side of the road, etc. And when we got to the stream, we were the only people on that stream. Everybody there, all those recreators were going up on the 14ers. They were going hiking for the day or camping or backpacking over the one and going on to the next one, but none of them were fly fishing. So it was kind of an interesting experience for us, because we realized that even though here we are in a densely it's a desirable place for so many people, we still found our oasis right next to all these people, because they were going to the really popular area and we were going to an area that wasn't as popular, and we ended up catching plenty of fish and having just a really enjoyable time.
It's interesting you mentioned that story, because I had a similar experience. I was working on one of my columns for the Indy, and it was a set of lakes. I'm just looking up the lakes to make sure I have them right. Yep. It was called the Square Top Lakes, and they're at the top of Guanella Pass. And the top of Guanella Pass is also the trailhead for Mount Bierstadt, which is one of the more popular 14ers, because it's, for 14er, it's pretty easy. And I was there on a weekday, because I do these things on weekdays. I don't do them on weekends because I know they're insanely busy. Right. The parking lot jammed full. The road jammed full. I find a place to park. I get out and I hike on this trail. Well, Mount Bierstadt is this way. I'm going this way to Square Top Lakes, and I go a quarter mile down the trail with my friends, not a soul to be seen.
Exactly.
We hike up to these lakes, and I look across the valley here and across the pass, and I look out Mount Bierstadt, and it is a conga line of people going up there. And I get you want to do the 14er, but I am having this wonderful experience at these 2 12,000-foot high lakes with me and a couple of friends and not another soul to be seen. I'm going, I think
Yeah.
they're missing the greater experience here because
Yeah.
I got to tackle that 14. And I'm, I'm not a big 14er person. It's not a big deal for me. I get it. For some people, it is. If that's what makes you happy, I'm certainly not going to say that's a bad thing. But I'm thinking I am having this wonderful experience at these high altitude, crystal clear blue lakes where I can see
Mhm.
the fish all the way at the bottom with no noise, no trash, no people around me. And I parked the same place they did. I just
Yeah.
went right and they went left. And it's just um, it's interesting how you're right that those little things. You go there and there's a bazillion people and you have the creek to yourself. Everybody
Yeah.
else is elbowing each other trying to get up these 14ers, and it's like I
Yeah.
think somebody's missing the picture here. Missing an opportunity here.
Yeah, I think it's something that, we need to continue to encourage people to think about going a little further, going to a different place, um, and just be a little bit more committed. And those experiences are still there to be had. They really are. But if we become sheeple and we just follow everybody, number one, like you said, the experience, that's not the experience I want. And secondly, I'm probably adding to the group and I'm taking away from somebody else's experience, where if I just go the other direction or go somewhere else, and I'm not saying to not be educated about where you're going. I mean, plan and prepare definitely ahead of time, but try to think about places that are not already heavily used, heavily impacted. The other thing, and you and I know this, go at a different time. You mentioned going middle of the week. Go middle of the week, go early, go late. For again, as an angler, when I go into, one of my favorite places is 11 Mile Canyon because it's just gorgeous, and whether you catch a fish or not, you're just like, oh, this is amazing. But if you stay, or if you go in a little later and you stay in the dusk, even into the twilight, nobody is there. I mean, that's not when all the anglers are. They're there. They came, they fished, they left. That's when you come and you can still have the river largely to yourself, or at least you're not feeling crammed in or feel like everybody's there with you. So I feel like, educating people about that, where to go, different places, when to go. I think there are still those experiences to be had. And I think our land managers accurately and correctly need to think about, they've got the masses of people, and there are people that just want to come for the quick experience. They want to see, they want to do the Manitou Incline. They want to do this or that for a first time, or to check it off their bucket list, or what have you. And I think you and I have talked about this, where you put, for people who just want that first experience, put more of the amenities there. And then those amenities lessen further into the backcountry, further into the resource, so that just those who want that me and nature experience can have that. So I think there are ways to plan. Planning is super essential to everything we're talking about. And that's why I'm excited. We're doing the Colorado Outdoor Regional Partnerships Initiative, and we're looking at planning for the future because we're already, we were planning for this before the pandemic hit, and then it hit, and here we are, like we said, kind of behind the eight ball. But if you don't plan for these things so that you have the amenities so many people need for the little more front country experiences, outdoor recreation experiences that they want, and then you provide amenities, but fewer and fewer as you get further into the backcountry, and then people can just have a fully backcountry experience, I think that makes a lot of sense. But it takes planning, and it takes thoughtfulness, and it takes bringing all those stakeholders together to be able to wrestle with the varying values of this user group versus this user group, or even how conservation and recreation go together. All of that has to be done with everybody at the table, being respectful and thinking through what's best for the future of the area.
Do you think that the land managers are doing a good job of telling people exactly what you just mentioned and what I've mentioned before in my columns about when to go. They talk a lot about, plan your trip in terms of safety, which obviously is very important. Make sure you understand the terrain you're going to go in, you're equipped for
Mhm.
that stuff. But I don't see a lot of messaging coming from the various land managers about Wednesday is better than Saturday, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on weather, may be better than eight
Yeah.
o'clock in the morning. I think maybe we're missing a little bit on that. I know that if I'm going someplace and there are more cars going the opposite way that I'm going, I'm going to have a great experience. They're all leaving. And of course, it depends on what you're doing. If I'm taking a 4 mile hike, going at 2 o'clock in the afternoon is better than if I'm doing a 10 mile hike and I'm going at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Obviously, there's a
Yeah.
big difference. This is all situational, but I don't know that they're necessarily telling people that message. And again, when I say this, I'm not pointing fingers.
Yeah.
They have a lot of things to do. They're trying to manage people, but I wonder if sometimes something as simple as go in the afternoon is
Yeah.
better than telling everybody get there first thing in the morning and make sure you get your spot and camp it out and stake it out and elbow your way to the front of the line. I'm thinking I go to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There's no line. I have all the parking I want. I wonder if sometimes we're missing that
Yeah.
message.
I think that's a good point. I really haven't seen a lot of that messaging either. And I think you're right though. Their focus overall, and you really can't throw all the land managers in one pile and
No,
say they're all the same, because they're not. And what they deal with is different from one place to another.
I am speaking
Um,
very broadly.
yeah, but I do think more of that education would be a good thing. Absolutely. Um, I also think, on the side of tourism, the tourism office is definitely understanding this. And Visit COS here locally, and even Colorado Tourism Office, they're looking at their marketing shifting from the already busy summer months to the shoulder seasons, to the seasons that, it's Colorado, it's beautiful. We have amazing fall and spring. And for people to come during that time could lessen the impacts during the summer. And so we've seen a shift in marketing, very intentionally, for that very reason, to make it sustainable tourism that supports our communities instead of something that makes it worse. So that's a good thing. I've seen them do that.
I've often said that the best time to visit Colorado is September. And the reason why I tell people that, you're after the monsoon season for the most part. So
Yeah.
the rains that we typically get July and August, they're gone. The temperatures are still really nice and warm. They're very
Yeah.
comfortable. Um, there's still some wildflowers to see, and fall foliage is starting to change. And everybody who has kids in school, they're all back home going to school. All that kind of stuff is over. And I've said September going into early October, it is the best time to visit Colorado because it is just
Yeah.
beautiful out there. You get a little bit of everything. And as you know,
I would
some of
agree. Yeah.
my best photography and some of the photography workshops I
Mhm.
do are in September and October because the leaves are changing and it's gorgeous. And I think I'm glad to see that the tourism people are catching up with that. I will say, and this is without being critical, that they have been a little late in getting on that line of thinking. That they were
Mhm.
always May, June, July, August. Come out in the summer and visit, which I get it. That's when people have vacation time, kids are off from school. But a lot of kids now are on 12-month cycles, so they're not
Right.
off for the entire summer. They have blocks of time off during the year. I'm glad to see that they have caught up with all this, and now are saying, "Hey, you know what? September and October are gorgeous here. December is the ski industry has been on
Yeah.
that. Obviously, come out here in December, January,
Yeah.
but the tourism people, other than skiing, never thought of that. And I think I'm glad that we're seeing that spread out a little bit and help people with that.
Yeah, and I think, the other part of that is, now that you may need a reservation for a place, go what's considered off season. It's really not off season. It's just not the busy, crazy season. But you might be more likely to get a reservation. We talked earlier, I'm just going to touch on this real quickly because I think it's something important to think about. There's a lot of innovation happening right now, but there are also a lot of trial and error with our different management things. We're trying to figure out how best to do this. So with preservation systems, it's kind of interesting. For example, I lead a women's fly fishing group, and we like to all camp together once during the summer. Well, I have to plan it 6 months in advance, and you have to be ready. And for me, because I'm doing so many sites, I have to have 2 people. And when we're ready until the time changes to 8 a.m. in the morning, and then we quickly reserve, that one, and they all get just snatched up like that. But what's interesting about the reservation system is so many of those reservations end up being no-shows, because what a lot of people do, it's a small dollar amount to reserve a place, and I'm talking camping, but the same is true for like the incline, et cetera, and where there's no fee. But there's not a lot of commitment, I guess, on having to reserve a place. So people may not even have their vacation planned, and they just reserve a whole 2-week period or a longer period than they need. And then they basically are abandoning that other piece. You go and there's nobody else right next to you, but it was all reserved. So our land managers are starting to learn about that, and they're learning about doing no cancellation fees, and I would love to see them reserve some sites that are first come, first serve, period. The others are reservation, but make some so that you can be spontaneous. But so they're learning through this. It's a new system, or multiple types of systems. And I think in the future, we're going to be seeing a lot of different hybrids in the way that this is managed that will better work for people.
We're seeing some of that happening already with the Bureau of Land Management, and up in northern Arizona, southern Utah, right on the border, there's a place called the Wave, which I visited, and I think you may have seen some photos I posted of that. It has always been a very tightly controlled, limited number of people can go in there per day, and the way it's been done is 6 months out you can reserve a spot, but they've always reserved a number of spaces to be giving out the night before. And the problem with that was you had to show up at the office in Canab, Utah to reserve your spot for the night before. Well, that's a little problematic, but they also didn't want it to be where anybody anywhere can reserve a spot and then not show up, and then somebody who was in Page, for example, down the road couldn't go. So they've now opened up with a mobile type system, but it is also geofenced. So if you're not within a specific boundary, you don't have to go to the office in Canab, Utah, but if you're not within a specific boundary based on your GPS on your phone, you can't go, and you can't be in New York City and say, I want a ticket for tomorrow. You're not going to make it. So that's just not going to happen. So they're coming up with some ways to do that. I'm kind of excited to see that they're still preserving the resource. They're still giving people who can plan 6 months ahead an opportunity, along with people who happen to find themselves in the area, but making it a little easier for those slots to be given out. And I'm kind of excited by that. It's a trial thing that they just started within the last month, I believe. It'll be interesting to see how that works, but you're right. They are trying to figure it out. One of the things I think the pandemic has done is made the learning curve for these agencies really shorten up. They've had to learn a lot in a hurry. As we know, some government agencies are very slow to operate because they're just big bureaucracies. But I think in some manners, they've managed to say, you know what? Let's just try this in this one little spot. We don't have to make this bureau-wide. And if it works here, we can start working it in other places where it needs to be done and not make it a blanket thing. I see that there's some flexibility with our agencies and how they're doing this. That's kind of a good thing to see.
Yeah, it is. And I think that there's been more and more sharing of these innovations and these ideas across boundaries. So For example, one ranger district is looking at what another ranger district is doing. They might watch their pilot program and go, okay, that's working there. What if we did concessionaires a little differently here? Or what if we took some of our campsites, made them designated, others not, et cetera. So I think there's been a lot more sharing within and outside of agencies and communities, just looking at what's working and what's not working. I think we're a little bit more open to that now than we used to be.
Great. So I guess getting back to the original question I had at the beginning of this podcast, and you provided some great information and some wonderful insight into what our land managers are dealing with, and I think it's good to have this perspective here. I think we can acknowledge that we're never, ever going to get back to the way it used to be. Is it reasonable to think that where we're at now is kind of the new normal and that hopefully it doesn't get any worse? Are we reasonable there? And you know, I know you can't speak for everybody, but give me your thoughts on that, your opinion on that.
I think by getting worse, I think you're talking about clamping down on recreation, making it more restricted. I am hoping that what we're dealing with right now is kind of a transition time. I feel like they're trying things on, trying to see how it works, and then they're shifting to what works best. And I think we'll end up with something better than where we are today. But one of the things that I would say is incredibly important to all of this is public engagement. So having your voice heard, talking to your congressman, talking to your local leaders, your city council, your land managers, sharing public input matters. It really does matter. So, but make sure your input is constructive. So it's not just, I don't like that. You took away everything that I enjoyed. Instead, maybe share, this is how my family enjoys recreating. We would love to see more opportunities for X in our area, and why that is. So I think all of these entities that are, you know, again, they're a little bit reactive right now through where we're at, but I think that they're going to transition into maybe some models that are a little bit better. They all have to be responsive to the public. They're called to be responsive to the public. And so I just think for us to have what we want in the future, we need to recognize the reality. We can't go in blindly and say, why can't it be like it was when me and my family camped, you know, when I was growing up? Things have changed. We are in a little bit of a different reality. So recognize what our land managers are up against, but at the same time, share what your values are. What is important to you? Because again, they're responsive to the public. They are managing your public lands. So make sure that your voice is heard in the process.
I think you're right about the adapting, because the adaptability of these agencies. For example, if you look at the advanced reservation system that Arches National Park has put in, for example, it is mind-boggling complex. I tried to explain it once and I got lost. It's not as easy as it could have been. Whereas Rocky Mountain National Park's a little bit less complex. Now, do they deal with the same number of peoples and they have the same traffic issues? No, they're different entities, vastly different environments, supported by vastly different local entities and stuff. But one would hopefully that maybe if Arches gets the feedback, like, you know, this is really hard to figure out, that they sit back and go, well, we could probably make this a little easier. I think they're trying to jump in the middle, try to fix problems in a hurry, and they got to do something. Obviously, I don't expect them to not do anything, but I hope as they, you know, as time goes on, they say, you know, we could probably make this a little easier. For example, El Dorado Canyon's upcoming reservation system, timed entry system, is only for Friday, Saturday, Sundays, and holidays. It's
Mhm.
not 7 days a week, which I think everybody appreciates that. You don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Again, we talk about go on a Wednesday. Well, you're going to be easier because that's not the busy time there. But Friday, Saturday, Sundays are. And their problem impacts a very tiny little town that's right at their front gate, which just gets mind-boggling, just tied up. So I like that. I'm a little not happy that one of our state parks has to do the system, but I was glad to see that they really are taking a measured approach. It's not going to be 24/7. It's going to be a couple days when it's really busy. We're going to manage that.
Right.
And I think that goes a step into managing people's expectations. Now they know if they go there on a Friday or Saturday or a Sunday, they're going to have to reserve it, but they're not going to have a traffic tie-up all through little tiny El Dorado Springs, for crying out loud, and a traffic tie-up through that very narrow canyon where there's not so many. So they're going to be inconvenienced a little bit at the beginning, but the end result will be they can just drive in, go park, and go hiking and not have to deal with a lot of traffic. And I think that's kind of where we're at. I'm hoping that's where they're at. And the end result, we'll get over the griping. I do some of it, I know.
We all do.
Yeah, we all do. I think we get over that eventually.
Human nature.
Yeah, and I think when we get to a point that we see that our experience is actually going to be a little better down the road, and I have to adapt that I can't spontaneously go to places that I used to, and I have to adapt. Becky, anything else you want to tell us? How can people follow PPORA and be in tune with the work you guys are doing and hear about these things as they're coming around?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have a newsletter, and you can go to ppora.org and sign up for our newsletter. We're also on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So you can certainly follow us there. But we'd be happy to engage with the people in the community and hear your thoughts on what's important to you with the outdoor space. So really appreciate your time, Bob, and sharing this important topic. It's one we'll probably be coming back to, every so often, because it's, we are in a new time. So it's going to be interesting to watch and see what happens. But I just really encourage the public to look to the future positively, and by all means, don't give up on getting out to the outdoors. There are ways to get out and still have those amazing experiences. So look for good resources, good information, and then get out and enjoy it.
Excellent. Well, Becky, thank you so much for being on the podcast again. Always appreciate having you on and talking with you about these things. Because, like I said, you are more in touch with people than I am, and most of the public wouldn't even know where to start. So and it's just because of what it is. But I really appreciate you taking the time to be on.
You bet. Happy to do it, Bob.
All righty. And thanks, everybody, for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. We'll talk to you next time.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us, because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.